Hello and welcome back to Jules Math Tools. In our session today, we are looking at what is a coefficient. So if you're ready, let's get started. When looking at an equation, sometimes it can be a bit difficult to identify what exactly is our coefficient. But luckily for you, in this session, we're going to be discussing that topic. So what is our coefficient? Remember that the coefficient is the number that's being multiplied to your variable in the equation. So whenever you see an equation where there's a number and a variable joined together, that number that's with your variable is what we call the coefficient. Now when it comes to the number that's with our variable, you must remember that in our term that we're given, which is 3x, this means that our 3 is being times or multiplied to x. And in this term, our 3 is our coefficient and the x is our variable. So what about those variables that we may sometimes have where there's no coefficient or no number written in front of them? When you see variables that are written by themselves, you must remember that these variables do have a coefficient and that coefficient is 1. So whenever a variable is written by itself, it has a coefficient of 1. So our t means 1t. And you must remember that with these variables that are written, anytime that there's a number or a coefficient that is larger than 1 or less than 1, this coefficient will always be written in. But whenever our variable has only a coefficient of 1, 1 will be the only coefficient that isn't written. So you must remember that when your variable is given to you by itself, it still has a coefficient of 1. Now let's go through some practice before we move along. In this section, we're going to be identifying what is the coefficient below. So in our first expression that is given to us, which is 7p plus 1, what do you think our coefficient is? And if you guess 7, you are correct. 7 is our coefficient. What about in this one? And remember, we just talked about this one, that whenever our variable is written by itself, it has a coefficient of 1. And in this one, and if you guess that we have two coefficients, which is 5 and 2, then you are correct. Because we're given two variables, that means that we have two coefficients. What about in this form? What do you think our coefficient is? And if you guess 4/9, then you are absolutely correct. Remember that 4/9 is being multiplied to our variable. So we just remove the variable and we put everything back, which is our 4/9, and that will be our coefficient. What about in this case? And if you guessed it, 1/8 is our coefficient. Remember that h is in the numerator by itself, and the only time our coefficient is not written is when we have a coefficient of 1. So our coefficient for this one would be 1/8. And what about this last one? And if you guessed none, you are absolutely correct. Remember that 15 is not being multiplied to a variable or it's not written with a variable, which means that in this case, we have no coefficient because 15 is just simply our constant. Okay, so let's review before we close out. So remember that your coefficient is the number that is being multiplied to your variable. So that means that anytime that you see a number and a variable together, that number is your coefficient. And also remember that in cases where you have the variables written by themselves, remember that you still have a coefficient and the coefficient is 1. Okay, so there you have it. We just went through what is a coefficient, and I hope this video helps you with identifying the coefficient in your equation. And make sure that you leave a comment below. Maybe there's something else I may have missed out or I needed to add, so you can feel free to leave a comment. And until next time, this is Jules Math Tools, where math is made easy.